We're going to talk about operational efficiencies, but Miranda, how about we do a quick introduction from you and then give it a few minutes for folks to join in, and we'll go ahead and get started.
Yeah, well, good afternoon, everyone, or as Asim said, good morning or good evening. I feel like we're the Truman Show right now, right?
Right.
So, Maranda Dziekonski. I am currently the SVP of Customer Success at HourWork. I've only been there for about 3 months. Prior to that, I was the Chief Customer Officer and Chief People Officer for 4 years at a company called Swiftly, which was a big data platform that powered public transit. I've been doing customer-facing operations now for well over 20 years. I started out at a very large organization that did about 40 to 50 billion a year in revenue, spent 9 years there, and then made my trek to Silicon Valley, where I've now been part of 8 startups. So have a lot of stories. One day I shall write a book. Awesome. To tell those fun stories, but been a part of a couple that have had, well, I should say I've had 4 exits now and a couple of failed startups. But maybe some that people have heard of are Lending Club, Hello Sign. Those are 2 of the ones that I think people may have heard of. And then there's a bunch of others that nobody's heard of. So,
yeah, got it. Well, until you write the book, you have this show to express your views. And with that, so first of all, Miranda, thank you for your introduction. And the topic today that we're going to be talking about, you have a huge amount of experience here and a lot of depth around operational matters and operational excellence. And so we're going to talk about that in the context of customer success. You know, when we last talked, you talked about this idea of do more with what you have, which I like so much better than do more with less. That everybody in Silicon Valley has grown up on. But let's maybe start there. When you say do more with what you have, let's maybe start there. What does that mean? And then we'll lead into a conversation around a little bit of understanding some of your current experiences and past experiences.
Yeah, so I don't want to, paint a picture of doom and gloom, because I don't think that's the actual scenario we're in as an industry, but I do think we are in a big pivot. So, just to paint a picture, last year per layoffs.fyi, we had around 154,000 layoffs in tech. It's like 154,000, which was a lot for tech, especially coming off from a couple of years where you couldn't hire people because the talent pool was just gone. There was the Great Resignation, then the Great Reshuffle, and then, yada, yada, yada. We all know the story. And then, coming into the end of last year, the Fed started, increasing the interest rates, which made the cost of money more expensive, which means, the funds were, probably struggling to get investors who would freely give them money, to give more money because money is more expensive. Which means it is shifting the way we have to think about and do business. And in every department, in every area. And yes, we're going to focus this conversation on customer success and talking about doing more with what you have rather than doing more with less or just doing more. So the context is, of course, now at the top level, if you are not hearing this from your leaders, they are hearing from their board that they need to be more efficient. They need to be guardians of not just the revenue that they are currently earning, but also the cash that they have in the bank, which means there's going to be a bigger scrutinization of, where you are spending. So that's kind of like the precipice of what I mean when I say that. I don't know if that's a good way to cue it up, but
that's perfect. That's perfect. So let's we're going to come back to this topic in a moment. I'd love for everybody to at least share where they're joining from today and who do you work with. And if you don't mind, if you're just joining us, I see a couple of new people joined us. We're going to encourage you to join the conversation. Please share where you're from, which company do you work with, and then ask your questions as we go through this. The topic today, for those of us just joining, is really around operational efficiency to drive growth and operational excellence. My guest today, Maranda, SVP of Customer Success at HourWork, And so, Miranda, maybe take a minute to just help us understand HourWork. What does the company do for those not familiar?
Yeah, I mean, very simply, we're a HR platform for hourly workers.
Mhm.
As simple as you can put it. We drive communications, engagement, hopefully increase retention by doing things like that. So it's very simple, but that's what we do. Our focus is definitely B2B, but it's a smaller business, whereas my last company that I was with for 4 years was B2B enterprise.
Mhm.
So I have seen B2B enterprise level, small business level, B2C, B2B2C. I've worked in marketplaces. So this is definitely a different end of the spectrum for me.
For sure. And I think that's a great segue into the next sort of question that I had lined up, which is, you've got this unique expertise in terms of working with both companies that have targeted SMB customers as well as enterprise customers. How is customer success different in those two sort of endpoints of the spectrum?
Yeah, so depending on how big of an enterprise you're dealing with, larger enterprise customers, it's generally more one-to-one, white glove, heavily focused on, of course, every part is focused on ROI, but you're very focused on ROI. When somebody's giving you $1 million a year, you want to make sure that they're getting a solid return on their investment, and they know they're getting a solid return on their investment.
Mhm.
If somebody's giving you $9.99 a month, of course you want them to have a strong return on their investment, but the table stakes are lower. So that is the biggest difference in how you think about driving outcomes and driving value, and the activities you put behind it. I'll give an example. So at Swiftly, we had constructed what I called the value cycle. And the value cycle was very simply put, you surface the problem statements with the customer, figure out a plan together on how you're going to solve those problems collectively with your tool. And it's a heavy partnership. Of course, the customers, again, are paying hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, so we can afford this. Then once you deliver on that plan, you report on the value that was delivered through an executive business review or some kind of touch point, and collect new problem statements, wash, rinse, repeat. On the lower end of the spectrum, when I was at HelloSign, for example, HelloSign is definitely the lower end, $9.99 a month for some customers. Some customers pay thousands a month. You really want to leverage your tools and your technology to do a similar motion. The customers, it's not as direct, if that makes sense. Like, you're not calling the customer and saying,
Right.
"Do you feel like you got $9.99 worth of value out of your use this month?" Like, it's not that direct. It's just making sure that they're getting the outcomes, that they know how to use all the features, that it's available and it works when they need it, that if they have a question, there's somebody there or a tool there to help them answer.
Yeah, great point. So it's what I just going to recap a little bit for what I just heard. If you're focusing on the enterprise and the high end of the segment, then the attention is really around the value creation part of it. And then if you're focusing on the SMB segment, you can obviously reach out one-on-one to every user through traditional methods. So it's how do you use digital, how do you use technology, and access that installed base in a different way. Makes sense. So Miranda, you've also experienced different, scales of companies from, you mentioned 4 startups, 2 that had good exits and scaled up and so on. And then of course, a company with, what was it, about 20 or 50 billion in revenue early in your career. Tell us a little bit about how you think about setting up a customer success organization differently, depending upon what stage of maturity the company's at. And we're going to stick with the series A, B, C sort of spectrum, because that's typically where our audience is in most of our conversations.
Yeah, I love that question. So let's talk about Series A. And that's generally where I like to join. If you are a leader and you're joining a Series A startup and there is no customer success team, in place yet, or there is a small team of folks that are generalist, it can be kind of overwhelming to figure out where to get started. What I suggest folks to do is first, really understand what are the goals for the company for the next 6 months, 12 months, 18 months. I usually kind of say, let's keep it right there, because Series A, in 3 months, let's be real, your company could be a completely different company than it is today. So you don't want to plan out 2 years, 5 years when you're building out the fundamentals and foundation of your operation. So first, understand your company goals. I really center myself around, where do we need to be for revenue? What does that mean? What do we need to meet for churn then? How much of that new revenue or revenue in general is going to come from renewal, upsell, and renewal, upsell versus new logo. And if you hear any noises in the background, I want to apologize. I have a very cute Shih Tzu who is snoring so loud. So if I seem distracted, I'm just going to call it out. So if y'all hear it, that's what it is.
We don't hear it. It's all good.
Okay.
And if he wakes up, he's welcome to join the show.
Perfect. He may, who knows? He sounds like he's having a lovely sleep. So I start then, understanding where we need to be at each of those markers, what needs to be true. Then in a Series A startup, you're not usually flush with resources. And this is, again, going back to doing more with what you have. So I want to call that out. So start with understanding. After that, start with understanding, what is the minimum experience my customer needs to receive in order to be successful in our product? To get at that, sometimes you have to start with segmentation. If you have enterprise, mid-market, small business customers in your mix, each customer segmentation could potentially need a different minimum experience to be able to be successful in your product. I then map that out along with the goals and then figure out, what are my levers that I can pull to drive that experience, to drive those outcomes? What are the processes that I need? What are the people? What are the skills that they need? What are the tools? And I map that all out. That's generally how I start when I start at a Series A. Of course, there's so many other things that I do as well. So I do a listening tour, a learning tour. I respect history. I want to call that out. Be very respectful when you're coming in and building out a team, because there's a lot of work that you haven't seen that has been done to get them to this point. And also, I talk to a ton of customers just to understand, how has your experience been so far? What could we do to make this a more successful partnership? Talk to churn customers, understand all of that type of stuff. So I know I just spit a lot out, but.
Got it. No, that's great. So we talked about Series A and the way that you approach that. And I would actually love to hear from folks that are on the call, what stage your company is at, if you're B2B or B2C, whether you're enterprise focused or SMB focused. It's also a call out if you have any questions you'd like to raise. This is a great time to start including and bringing those up. And if you'd raise your hand, metaphorically on Zoom, we will invite you to speak up and open up your lines. So we'd welcome that conversation, but love to make this more interactive. Okay, so Series A companies typically, still figuring out product market fit, trying to figure out how to scale from there on with B and C. How do things change when you go to Series B or a Series C company from what you just shared with us?
So Series B, you generally have your product market fit. I would argue to say most Series A companies do as well. Especially now, I think, folks at the Series A level want to see that you do have some traction coming out of your seed into your Series A. So product market fit is generally figured out. You have the core foundations of your operations in place when you're heading into Series B. Series B is generally when you take your team from being a group of specialists, or I'm sorry, a group of generalists into a more specialized team. Good examples would be in Series A, you may have a handful of team members and maybe even yourself, maybe you are a player coach, and you all are doing everything from customer support tickets to onboarding and implementation, the customer success motion, renewals, upsells, opening the mail, cleaning the refrigerator. Like that is generally the Series A motion. Series B is when you start seeing these functional teams broken out because you're prepping usually for scale. for massive growth. I will say these are kind of just loose barometers because I've also been a part of a company that didn't need to get a Series B.
Those are the best.
So successful that we were doing all of this stuff that I'm just mentioning right now at Series A because we hit the ground running and had that hockey stick curve like organically. So these are just loose beacons for folks to follow. But if you are part of a company that is going for a Series B or have just achieved their Series B and you haven't specialized yet within your org, seriously take a look at the different functions that are within your organization and figure out which ones should be split out and specialized, because this is how you get operational efficiencies. This is how you create that, I like an assembly line, so to speak. I know that's a bad metaphor, but in my brain, that's how I see it. Is like an assembly line, somebody who handles this tech support, somebody who handles the portion of onboarding implementation, peels those things off from the customer success manager so they can really be focused on that proactive relationship management. Yep,
makes sense. Okay, so we talked about Series A, B, C, kind of the different stages of the company and how to approach. Let's talk about, for a moment, let's talk about the tools, right? So every CS organization has, typically starts off, we're kind of at that stage where we manage everything through spreadsheets, and then we move to HubSpot, and then we, look at the next tool that's going to get us to the next scale level, et cetera. What's your advice for companies that are trying to figure out their tooling from a data standpoint, workflow standpoint, BI standpoint, in the customer success domain? Like what, and again, let's talk about it like Series A, B, C, and beyond growth companies. How should they be thinking about it? What are your experiences in working with some of the tools in the industry?
Yeah, it's funny. I just posted either yesterday or the day before a post, advising folks to stop trying to be bigger than you are.
Yeah.
Don't skip the steps, because I've seen this again and again and again, not only as an executive at various startups, but also as somebody who does advisory work and sits on a couple of, boards where, you'll have a very small group of 15 people in a company and they're like, oh, we need Salesforce or we need Gainsight. And these are
great tools, but
great tools,
completely different scale.
Massive tools, right? These tools require almost a full-time person to manage them and keep them functional. Because the old adage, garbage in, garbage out, right? So you want to make sure you're not having the garbage in, garbage out. So you have to have somebody who's constantly keeping these things up. So if you are a Series A company, I would always advise, don't just go out and just buy a tool. Really look at what you're trying to solve for. So I always tell folks, do a needs assessment and understand heavily where your gaps are. Again, I'll give an example. If you are a leader that you're like, oh, I really need to have an understanding of the activities that are going on within my team. What is the health of the portfolio? What's coming up for renewal? What does usage look like? How often are our customers logging in? This is the kind of needs assessment you would put in a spreadsheet. I also urge you to not do this in a silo. So talk to your product counterparts, talk to your sales counterparts, talk to the folks on your team, and make sure you're including what they need in this needs assessment. Then the next thing I would look at is, are any of these needs solvable with process change, with maybe a restructuring of the current tool set we're using? Are any of these needs, solvable in a different way than going out and buying a tool? Okay, so that's thing two. And then what you'll find is sometimes yes, and sometimes no. The big call out though is tools are not magic bullets. They're there to enhance and build upon the process, the skill sets of your team, the people that you have, right? They're just there to enhance, to help you with the facilitation of something. If you're using a tool as a magic bullet, the tool is not going to solve your problem.
Mhm.
Unless you're ChatGPT, maybe, I guess ChatGPT is solving everything, but that is not usually the case. So my advice is first look inwardly and see what you're really trying to solve by doing the needs assessment before you run out and buy something.
Okay.
One more call out before I hand it back to you is I see a time and time again where folks are like, oh, this tool is garbage. So they're ripping this tool out and they're going out and getting something that they've perceived to be better. If you are doing that, if you have been using a tool and it's not working for you, and you're now looking at the next best thing, which is a competitor of that tool, I want to warn you, you're probably going to have the same problems with the new tool as you do the current tool. So again, really do a 5 why kind of exercise or some kind of an assessment as to why this tool is not working for you.
Yeah.
And make sure it's actually the functionality of the tool, not the functionality of your team.
Yeah. Great points across the board there, Maranda. And I think what I'm taking away from this is before you start implementing tools or replacing tools, and I can't tell you how many conversations I've had where people are talking about re-implementation of the same tool again. There's a lot of pre-work that needs to happen. And the way that we talk about it is first do the work yourself, then automate it.
Yes.
And until you do it yourself, you're not going to know what is it that you're trying to automate. So totally buy into that. Now, since you brought up ChatGPT, I'm going to diverge a little bit and go down that road for a moment. I mean, look, AI is making huge progress, leaps and bounds, overnight success over the last 10 years, clearly. And so now that ChatGPT is in the hands of users and consumers and business people and everybody, and there are some incredible use cases that are emerging that are, regardless of which function you're in, marketing, sales, customer success, there's a lot you could do with it. And we are already starting to experiment that even in our product and development teams to see how we can accelerate writing code. But do you have a take on that as far as how this impacts the world of customer success? Just what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so it's funny. I was on a webinar, or it was on a webinar, I don't know, 3 or 4 weeks ago. And we talked a bit about AI and ChatGPT specifically. And when I first heard ChatGPT uttered, it was probably 3 or 4 months ago or something.
Right.
It was pretty recent, right?
Yeah.
And at first I was like, oh, pish posh. I've heard this AI thing before, and I'm not impressed. I was one of the original beta testers from Zendesk's chat bot they launched. Yeah. I was one of the first people to touch it and give feedback on it. And it worked perfectly fine for what it was, but it wasn't smart. Mm-hmm. It was an algorithm, right? That was going in and grabbing articles with keywords. I will tell you, ChatGPT has really got my attention. Mm-hmm. I do think there's still some more work to be done, but as somebody who's in her mid-40s and has been, around since the late 90s, this seems like the real deal. Mm-hmm. This seems like folks in marketing and customer support, in roles that maybe where critical thinking is not as necessary, should definitely be paying close attention to this. And I think there's a lot of power behind it, and leaders should be paying close attention to it, because if we are in a world where efficiencies will reign king, we're going to want to be able to have access to the top-notch tools that drive the best customer experience to be able to continue to retain and grow our revenue. And I think ChatGPT is going to be an awesome tool to add to our toolkit. However, albeit a little terrifying at the same time. So,
yeah. Okay. Well, that right there is a session by itself, and we will probably come to it soon, and I would welcome you to join us for that. But coming back to the conversation we were having earlier around operations and what that means. So you've covered sort of the tools, the processes a little bit from different stages of the company. CS operations as a function and why it exists. You have an interesting point of view on that. And I'd love to hear it. I'd love for everybody to hear it here as well.
Yeah, I can't remember what the point of view was that I shared with you before.
We were,
But,
we were talking about how Salesforce led to creation of sales
yeah.
admins because the product got to be too complex. And then that led to connect all my data into Salesforce. And then that led to, do we need a sales ops function? Oh, and now should we expand that to RevOps? And we're seeing a similar trajectory there with Gainsight, as requiring people
Yes.
who can operate in an admin setting, and then sort of moving into, well, now I need to bring all this data into it. And so, it's expensive to hire people. And is this so first of all, it's an important function. Let's acknowledge that.
Yes.
But then
Yes.
is there alternate ways of solving these same problems?
So here's the thing. And I remember this conversation now, and I apologize, but I literally, like, less than a week ago got back from a 10-hour time difference. So
Yeah.
I like conversations that I had prior to going
Yeah,
to
I hear you.
Israel and Spain is just like, whoop.
Yep.
Yeah, I remember this now. So I did have to put in a CS ops person specifically because of my tool choice.
Yeah.
That is not the reason why I want to put a CS ops person in, is to run a tool. If I am going to have a CS ops person, I want them to be doing strategic work for me. I want them to be looking at user data and analytics, and looking at the activities my CS org is doing to see how we can get, more value out of each contact. How do we make sure the customers are getting ROI? Like, really thinking about the strategy in our operations. But what has happened a lot, and I see this at many places, is a tool is selected, and by need to have that tool stood up, we put in a CS ops person or a RevOps person. Alternatively, I think depending on the size you are as an organization, if you're a smaller Series A or Series B company, let's just say under 15 to 20 million in revenue, that is a very expensive resource for you to use just to stand up a tool. So I'm just calling it out. So make sure you're tooling for the right size of your organization. And how do you know that the tool is the right size of your organization for your organization? You can stand it up as a leader yourself. Like, or somebody in your team can stand it up, and it doesn't require a ton of maintenance all the time. That is the right size. And then if you do want CS operations, you can have them actually do strategy work instead of keeping a tool running.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think I'm taking away from this, the focus is on how do I do, like, having an ops person in place is really all about making meaning out of data and helping drive strategy rather than maintaining a tool. And different tools fit organizations of different stages of their growth. So this isn't a one size fits all kind of conversation. So let's maybe shift gears a little bit, Miranda, talk about data, right? What kind of data sources do you tap into as you're trying to figure out, particularly at scale, and particularly like for the long tail or the SMB segments? You're thinking about churn, you're thinking about risk in your account base or growth opportunities in your account base. Are there data? I mean, the typical data sources, of course, are what's their past behavior, what are they doing in my product, what are they doing, based on like interactions. But are there other data sources that you seek out that help you give that signal better?
Yeah, so there are a few things. And, at my previous company, our health score was orchestrated a little bit differently, especially, we did have a bit of a long tail. So not only did we ingest the normal stuff like user data, making sure folks are logging in, we also looked at the overall investment as part of the health score. So if you have a product that is modular, this would work really well. Let's say you have a product where you can purchase 10 different modules of the product and somebody's only purchased one. That right there is a great scoring mechanism to figure out, are they healthy or not healthy? Are they sticky or not sticky? And again, that works for the long tail as well as your enterprise level. Other things, have they have they joined webinars? Are they participating in our blogs or any of our gated content? Also, have they referred anyone?
Mhm.
You know, you can have referral programs. And if somebody's leveraging like a unique link and sending it out and referring folks, that's a great health indicator as well. There's a lot of other data things like that that you can ingest to formulate a health score. I know others would, you know, again, usage, how much of the product are they using? Have they filled out their profile? Are they leveraging APIs? If you have APIs available, are they using the APIs? Are the APIs embedded within their product? These are all data points as well that folks should pay attention to when they're looking at the health of their overall portfolio.
Got it. Got it. Okay, great. So Miranda, just now kind of moving to the final part of the conversation, you know, anything to do with operational efficiency, ultimately, the conversation turns to KPIs and metrics. How do you think of KPIs and metrics in the CS domain?
Yeah, I mean, right now, the one metric that I generally hold every one of my teams accountable for is net retention. NRR is king. That is your how much that you had for renewal that month, renewed, plus how much expanded. Just putting it very simple.
Yeah.
So NRR, big. I also do measure gross retention. You could have, you know, depending on the makeup of your portfolio, you could have your NRR a bit skewed. If you have customers in a certain cohort that buy more. So if your enterprise customers are always buying more, but then you have a very big leaky bucket in SMB, it could be hidden in your NRR if you're not watching the gross retention as well. So definitely pay attention to that. Make sure you're doing cohort analysis as well as looking at it by segment. And also with segmentation, I do your typical ARR segmentation, enterprise, mid-market, SMB, but I also like to layer on my green space. So the available dollars that they could potentially spend. You could have folks that land in your SMB bucket that maybe are a big logo that could potentially be an enterprise. So I throw them in a strategic bucket just to make sure I'm monitoring them. Those are two of the key KPIs that I'm watching now. In my organization, I own various other functions as well. So of course, I'm looking at time to first value. I'm looking at CSAT, I'm looking at NPS, all of the sentiment metrics, usage, logins, all of that stuff is on a scorecard and is consistently watched for trends.
Got it. And are you able to connect the dots from, you know, individual sort of account level metrics to how is that impacting NRR, or how's that impacting gross retention? Or better question is, how do you connect the dots between those sort of different altitudes in the organization?
Yeah, so interestingly enough, at a previous company, we had it down to a science. We knew the different personas that were in the organization and how often they should be logging in and doing certain actions in order for them to be considered healthy, in order for them to be considered receiving ROI.
Yeah.
So if you are in a product where you can map things out by persona and get that persona level usage and understand what activities they need to do in order for them to be considered renewable, that I highly suggest because it's very helpful. It is a bit of work, but once you figure it out, it's gold.
It's a great point, actually, looking at usage by persona. I think that's a very interesting observation and approach. So I'm curious, like when you work with these tools, do you see limitations in the CS? So all CS platforms will make the claim to be able to bring any kind of data in. But what constraints or limitations do you see with the technology as it exists today? You know, especially when it comes to the utilization of that data or understanding that data and doing something with it. I benchmark it to ChatGPT. Like if I can have a conversation with my computer and it tells me what it observes in my, you know, data sets or summarizes, you know, complex paper into something that is easily understandable. Why can't I find that with way that data tools that operate on data? You know, why don't they operate that way? That's kind of the new expectation that's being set. But setting that aside, what do you think?
I don't think CS tools are there yet. And I'm talking about the main platforms. I'm not going to name
Sure.
names.
Yep.
I think they all do different, well, if you put them on a Venn diagram, there's a huge overlap, right? But they all have their own different little spin of they may cover this or that or the other. But I have not seen a CS platform yet where I could ingest the usage data and actually get the activities out of it that I need for my team to do. I end up having to go to like Appendo or some other tool to be able to really dive in to the activities. So that is definitely a limitation. I had a great conversation with the CEO of one of these companies giving feedback about limitations. And, you know, they know that there are these limitations, but they also know that there are tools out there that already do this stuff. So does it make sense for them to build that when they would compete against Pendo, right? So there's a lot of that going on. Now, there are other things too that would be nice to have in a one-stop shop. So for example, my support team is on Zendesk, and my CS team is usually on some CS platform. There's always a plugin where I can feed in the Zendesk tickets into the CS platform as a viewable. I would love it if we could have one platform that does everything Salesforce does, everything Zendesk does, and everything that like a Gainsight, Client Success, a Tatango, Churn Zero, you know, Catalyst. I don't want to leave any names out and upset anyone. So does in one platform. There are platforms out there that claim they do that. I haven't seen it done well. And I don't know if it's like a pipe dream, but I've wasted so much time trying to figure out how to push and pull data from these various systems to get a collective view of what's going on with the customer. You know, trying to figure out how do I get Salesforce to talk to all these tools? How do I get Zendesk to talk to all these tools? How do I get Pendo to talk to all these tools? And then how do I merge it all together? If I was like, if I had like a genie and a wish, it would be that. But it can't be clunky and it can't look like Salesforce.
Yeah. Well, we got to show you Immersa.ai. I think you just outlined exactly what we do. Okay, so that's great. So getting an understanding of how you think about the platforms and what some of the data limitations are, super helpful. I'm going to try and take this to a close. I think we've covered a lot of ground in terms of the breadth of your experience, of course, with a large spectrum of companies. But what does that translate into for a Series A, B, C company in terms of what products, tools, data, et cetera, do they need? How do you build for operational efficiency? What expectations to have of a CS ops person versus sort of shoveling data around? How do we get the insights and help them and leverage that to drive strategy? So we've covered a lot of ground today. Now, last question for you as we wrap up. When you think about customer success 5-10 years out, what does that word look like from your lens?
5 to 10 years out. That's a hard one, right?
Yeah, I mean, we're let's say leapfrogging. What does that look like?
Well, I honestly don't know if it will exist in 5 to 10 years. I hate to say that. I've seen this, and I'm a big fan of customer success. I mean, if you don't follow me on LinkedIn, just check out my LinkedIn, you will see.
Yeah.
I'm not sure it'll exist or it won't exist in this form. I think we are seeing a time now because of the environment that we're in where customer success is shifting to a more revenue generating role, which is really funny because it feels like we went from CS, don't touch revenue, to CS, now you own revenue. So it's almost like account management, but account management with a spin of being focused on ROI and outcomes and the relationships and all of that. So that, I don't know if it'll exist in its current form. I think if it does, it's going to be revenue generating, but also I'll just say it, maybe it's going to be ChatGPT running it in 5 to 10 years.
Well, you heard it here first. So on that note, well, you heard it here first from Maranda. And we, if that does come to pass, we will play this clip over and over again on our social channels. I promise you.
Nice.
Okay, so Miranda, and please go ahead and share your LinkedIn, if you don't mind, on the chat channel here. Anybody on the call that joined us today, you're welcome to connect to Miranda on her LinkedIn or reach out to me over LinkedIn or Asim at immersa.co. We welcome these conversations. Our goal here is to learn from each other and push the boundaries in terms of what the industry can expect of each other. And so if you have thoughts on your brain that weren't addressed today, reach out to us and we would love to engage in a conversation with you. And if you think you'd like to be a part of this show and be a guest here or invite somebody that you know should be a guest here, please let me know. I'm happy to follow up with you. Thank you for your time today, for joining us. Miranda, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. If you don't mind, just hang on for a few more minutes. We're going to let everybody else drop off and then we'll sign you out.
Perfect.
Okay, thanks everyone. And we'll see you all next week for another interesting, exciting session.